All right. Hello and welcome to another Node Operators Roundtable call. It is the 25th of October, 2023. And today we're actually going to be talking about this call and how we want to run the format of this call going forward. Before we get into that discussion, which will, I think, be the main topic of discussion today, I wanted to leave some open air here so that I can gather any other topics that we want to make sure we cover in today's call. So go ahead and shout out if you've got anything.
Quick one. So last week we were speaking about the new mechanism in order to get the timing right, the amount of CPU available to actually sign the transactions. And I've gone ahead and I'm running it 5.0 RC2 on Jungle. And it's a pretty stripped down config. And what I noticed, similar to how Kevin was explaining it, I hadn't actually seen it in the wild. The first like 11 blocks, they get smashed out, right? And then on the 12th block, it kind of hangs around. So typically your round would be 6 seconds, right? So I've got like 2.5 seconds of block production, and then it's just like pausing. Now, inside of my config, I had the CPU effort percent set at 40%, right? That was legacy of the old config, right? So then I thought, okay, well, let me manipulate that, because that was giving me 200 milliseconds. And then I took it to 60, and then it's giving me 300 milliseconds per block. But it doesn't wait. So it goes like bang, 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 right? So now that I've seen it in the wild, I would like you just to refresh my mind about how I should go about manipulating to get the maximum benefit. So if we can talk about that at some point in this call, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's circle back to that after the main topic. Certainly think that'll be an interesting discussion. Okay. Any other topics before we kick into the call format? And let me check chat real quick too. Yes, list of things remaining before 5.0. You know what? That one I think I'll cover first thing, because that's probably a good idea to generally start with that. Just a quick status update.
Yeah, I mean, what we need to be doing when I know it all kind of got shifted around.
Yep. Okay. Yeah, so let me bring up GitHub real quick so that we can look at the milestone together. So while I'm doing this, the shout out and plea to the community that I'll give is, again, I think node operators generally and quite reasonably wait for the stable release, right? But having folks kick the tires on the early release candidates is the purpose of these release candidates, and does help us identify issues before they make it into a production network. We do have situations, for example, Matthew Darwin has reported an issue that we haven't been able to reproduce. And so there's just no chance we would have found it unless he had, done it. By contrast, it happens 100% of the time for him, right? So it's like clearly an important thing, to get community folks to install this on a variety of different environments and find some of the things that we wouldn't find. So that's one thing that is that isn't going to be shown in the milestone here. That's between now and stable, is just more feedback. We've gotten feedback from a couple of you, and we really appreciate it. Keep it coming if you see anything else. And for those of you who haven't tried it yet, even something as simple as downloading it and building it can be helpful because you might find something wrong with a build, right? Even something as downloading the precompiled binaries and just seeing if you could start it can be helpful. And anything beyond that, is gravy. But again, people do all kinds of interesting things on their in their environments, and there's just no feasible way that we could test for every single possibility. So your help is always appreciated there. With that out of the way, let me share this milestone. Screen here. This is correct. Yes. Okay. And we'll go to the 5.0. So if you've, I have a feeling that most people don't look at the milestones that aren't internal to the EOS Network Foundation. And I'm not saying that you need to or should, but just in case you do pay attention there, you may have noticed that we had a milestone called Leap 5.0 stable. We've broken that in our most recent internal release planning into these 3 milestones: Leap 5.0 RC3, Leap 5.0, which is the stable release, and then Leap 5.01, which is just to indicate 5.01 is things that we know are wrong but are not blockers to releasing stable, and that we plan to fix in a follow-up patch release. 5.0 are things that we don't really need before the next release candidate, but we wouldn't feel good about calling it stable without them. And then RC3 is the stuff that we really need to fix before the next release candidate. So I'm going to start by digging into RC3 here, and you'll see the open issues that we have here. So the first one, I'm going to do these in sort of reverse order, actually. So the first one here is close to done. It's got some pretty minor changes on it and is currently in review. It's just some updates around some documentation and scripts. So no need to really go deep on that. This is the one that Matthew Darwin has reported that we haven't been able to reproduce internally. It's there's a segfault issue, specifically when starting from a snapshot and when using that new non-default option for the
that's interesting, because I did that and it worked.
Yeah, exactly. So this is a good example of where, because for Matthew, this happens, I think he said 100% of the time. So this is a good example where, when more people kick the tires, we see things we wouldn't see otherwise. So what we're doing with that is somebody is going to, from our team, Greg is the developer who's been working on this, is going to reach out and work with Matthew to get a stack trace and so that we can get all the information we need to figure out what's going on and whether it's something that we can fix, or if there's some kind of environment thing that at least is like a known incompatibility we have to document or whatever, right? In any case, just for context on this, because the hope, of course, is that we can fix it. If for some reason it's not fixable, it is for a new and non-default option, where this is being seen right now. So, and then the last one is the most critical of them, as far as needing to be in for the next candidate. And the full implications of this, to be frank, I don't completely understand, but what I do know is that there's some tests that are failing that indicate some more serious and fundamental issues that we can fix and know how to fix, and it's currently in progress. So for this one, I don't yet have like a good estimation on when it when it will be done. Same for the last one. I don't have a good estimation because we don't know the root cause of it yet. But we can't really move forward with the RC3 until the root cause of this is identified and fixed. So that's what's standing in the way. We don't plan, obviously, with the exception of finding new issues, we don't plan to add anything else to RC3, or for that matter, the stable release. So as these fall, we will be moving closer to an RC3, and we'll give that some baking time, a minimum of a week, and then promote to stable. Now for 5.0, there's just a CI/CD item here, which is to produce signed binaries. So if you recall, we were working on reproducible builds, which have been integrated with the sort of continuous integration system that we have for this. And now the next step is to produce signed binaries for Leap releases going forward. And this is just to be able to give sort of extra confidence and precaution that the binary that you're going to install, should you choose to work from a binary, came from the intended source, and you're not installing something malicious or something like that. Anyhow, and then there's just some test failures that we think the impact of, if they prove to be a real bug, the impact of that bug is small enough that we could fix it post-stable.
Yeah, I think we actually already have that one squashed.
Which one?
The top one.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see 2 pull releases or pull requests.
Yep.
Looks like there's still one that's open that.
Just in the main.
Say that again? Oh, just in the main. Gotcha.
Yeah,
Yep.
just in the main. That's just the factor up. So the fix has been applied to 5.0.
Yep. So once it's merged into main, that'll be closed, and there's only one remaining. So, cool. So I guess we might actually update that one's milestone just so we know where it is. But anyhow, yes. So I think that answers the question of what is remaining. Oh, and Matthew Darwin gave an update that he has provided Greg with a stack trace for that one issue. So yeah, progress is being made there, and we'll let you know as soon as the RC3 is available, which should be coming soon to a GitHub releases page near you. All right. Now, on to the main topic I had in mind here. By the way, if you folks haven't used Obsidian before, I'm a relatively new user of it, and I'm fangirling over it right now. So it's pretty cool. I won't go into the features because that's not the point of this call, but I've been enjoying it as a note-taking tool. All right. So I wanted to I have, a variety of questions I wanted to get through on this. The goal of this discussion is to make a decision on what we do with this call going forward. Canceling it is not one of the things that I intend to have on the table. I mean, if nobody feels like they're getting value, then we will do just that, but that's not my intention. I personally get a lot of value out of this as an opportunity to keep a close connection with community and obviously node operators in particular, and get feedback on things that we want to potentially roll out, or even just better understand how you guys actually run the software in practice, which doesn't always, align with what our imaginations might suggest, right? So, that for me is super valuable. But I wanted to just start with what what is the primary value that you're getting out of the calls in their current format? And the reason for asking this question is to make sure that if we move things around or anything, that we don't lose the value that you're getting currently. And you won't hurt my feelings if there's not a lot of answers here. I'm just.
Well, I thought it might be easier if he sent this to us and we could all just type our responses in. But if you want to talk through each point by point, we can do that.
You know what I can do is I can send these into the node operator chat as well, so that people can provide that feedback. But I would like to have some real-time discussion so that we can sort of I can observe how you might respond to each other's answers to these things, and also I can follow up things. So.
Okay, I'll go first. I love getting the insight from the technical team, especially when we table some of the challenges that we had, and some of the requests that we have. Kevin's listening to us, and I suppose it's also nice to have the rest of the block producing companies here, here to thrash it out when we disagree on stuff, etc. But it's nice to have a little bit of a conversation. But I think primarily it's the technical insight that I'm getting out of it.
Yeah, I would echo that. Like outside taking a break from coding, it's definitely getting insight and up-to-date information of where we're going with Lee. And for some people, for us like that, a lot of us are running nodes. All of us, I guess, are running nodes, but as well as some of us are building stuff. Knowing this information is super useful, especially upcoming stuff that can help us decide when to upgrade and how to use different features. So definitely technical insight for me is like the most important.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just here to hang out with Ross. No,
Neither with me anyway.
That's true. That's true. I'm excited, and I've said many a times, I'm excited to have the connection between the people that run it and abuse it and really edge case it, and some of the people that are under the hood that have the deep technical insight, and also having worked with the scenarios of why we asked for those features, and getting it to truly bridge that gap for the last 2 years, really. I mean, so to me that's exciting, and we've come a long way. I think the software has matured rapidly because of that.
Before I move to the next, anybody else? Kevin, I'm curious because you represent a very a different persona who also consistently attends this. How about you?
I think the biggest benefit to me is just hearing actual users. We don't typically dog food it ourselves in terms of we're not typically running a node, or at least I am from time to time, but certainly not in the same way. So just the feedback in terms from the actual people that are using it, of what is difficult, or what isn't working, or issues that are coming up. I mean, that's certainly the best part of this call for me, for sure, is just getting that feedback.
Yeah, same here, for sure. All right. Is there anything that we used to get out of these calls, or have never really gotten out of these calls, that you kind of wish we could be getting, that would make them more valuable?
Maybe a path to documentation of sorts. Like we kind of talked about it, but I think
I was thinking the exact same thing, and I was like, That's more like a feature request.
Now, isn't Nathan
Documentation.
handling a lot of the documentation and stuff like that? I mean, it might,
Yeah,
he might have
and
some
there's
conflicting.
there's also though different levels of documentation, right? There's what's in the actual like help texts and error messages, even for that matter, right? Like, so in the software, and then there's like, I'm not implying that all of this exists, but rather that all of it would be valuable. Then there's like protocol level documentation, like talking about how the protocol works, sort of abstract of implementation, right? Like, and then there's obviously, documentation for that's more persona based, like if you're a node operator, if you're a developer, if you're a BP, if you're, that sort of thing. But yeah, Nathan James sort of leads the developer relations and owns our documentation.
And I say that because I know that people ask and he's like, you mean this article? So I know that he's been doing a lot more of it. So maybe hearing the people that are running it, like y'all say, our perspective and our misunderstandings of it, right? I mean,
Yep.
Ralph was in the channel just this morning saying, we've been talking about this for 2 weeks and I just understood, I completely misunderstood it.
So we did have conversation months and months ago now, about like how you guys are running various type of nodes, and it sort of, got left there. I'm gleaning that there might be appetite to return to that, but like
eventually, I think, I mean, it gave you
output. Go ahead.
the general idea of how they all work, right? So, I mean, it definitely was helpful to give you that insight. And I would probably say, let's see how the dust settles with all the new features and because how all that runs in different edge cases and why we do this and this and this, I think are dramatically changing just because a lot of those features have been taken into account. Hopefully they work. We'll see.
Yeah. All right. Aside from documentation, any other sort of wishes for what we could have coming out of these calls?
Beer.
Like it.
Isn't it like 8 o'clock in the morning for you?
It's true, 9 o'clock.
5 o'clock somewhere. And copyright violation. Just kidding. All right.
It would be nice if we get like, and this happens quite often, where new features are added, and then someone who knows it inside out, like say Kevin, during the calls, during questions, he will provide like some real good insight, at least, that's not obvious by just reading the readmes and things. In an ideal world, like when there's new features introduced, I would personally love like having Kevin like just give us a nice, under the hood explanation of how technically things work, so that we can actually understand like more in depth the ramifications of this and how other use cases we might have in mind, that we can do.
Thank you.
Yeah, and of course, +1 on beer.
Always. All right. So another thing here is like, do we feel like a single call that just sort of morphs to what we need it to be at the time we need it is the best approach, or would we rather have break this up into different calls with different purposes? An example of this that already has happened is that there does exist a like developer, I don't remember what it's called right now, but we'll call it a developer roundtable call or something like that, Stephen and Brandon and Nathan are frequently on, among others. But anyway, there could, so there's sort of the persona approach to that, but then there's also kind of like the purpose, the intended outcome, right? For example, there's like a couple themes I've heard is like feedback, sort of gathering and status updates, and documentation, are a few different like purposes or intended outcomes here. So anyway, do any of those sort of rise to a level that they would be better off in a separate focused call, or do we feel good about the one call that?
Well, I think that what we talk about, it's suitable for this call.
Mm-hmm.
And if there was like an upgrade or something else, maybe we spin off another call, as we get to like a go live date or something. But I think this call encompasses the right kind of topics and can stay here. Spin off when required.
So basically ad hoc or short-lived calls as needed. Yeah, but not necessarily, like, no need for like separate recurring calls to be added. Okay.
I think the example you gave of like developer, I think most people on this call it's node operator call. It's not necessarily developer call unless it has to do with, how you can service the API or to enhance like developers use. So for me, that makes sense to keep it like all encompassing. That being said, of course, we have other like heavy hitters on the developer call. That would also be nice. Like people who are very familiar with the code base itself, not from necessarily writing smart contracts, but writing core code.
Right.
That's always super useful, but obviously their time is, limited.
Yep. That makes me think in another direction that I didn't write down here, but like, would it be valuable to occasionally have some, larger mixer with a specific goal, where we try to pull in other types of personas? It's a little muddy for me what the purpose of such a call would be. But it's just,
I think it will quickly turn into like a developer call because there's a limited node operators, but there's unlimited people who want to learn things and get help with their smart contract or their dev. And I think you'll just get out of control and node operators will probably stop attending, if I had to guess. Because it's just so outside like what they may need. Maybe if it's something where requests by people who are talking about like what the node operators can do for developers in terms of API related things or history solutions or something, that might make sense. But I think if you just allow general developers, it's just going to quickly convert the main topics.
Yeah. Oops. Very good. All right. How often do we feel it's most valuable to be having these calls? Just to sort of share my perspective and conflict and why I'm asking this question rather than just coming with a suggestion is that on the one hand, I feel that doing things very consistently, such as weekly, like we're doing them now, is really valuable for a number of reasons. And one is just so that there's enough space for small things to get time, and coverage and discussion. The other is just the practicalities of, if you do it, for example, every other week, then if somebody misses one or we have to cancel one altogether, then it's been a whole month. But maybe we think monthly is good enough. So let's, take it to that extreme. Like if you do it only once a month, you have to cancel or someone misses, you've missed it for 2 months, So there's that issue. On the other hand, time is certainly valuable. I don't want to waste anyone's time. And also I do feel like occasionally we've had times on this call where we've just sort of been like, I guess we don't really have anything we need to discuss right now, yeah, so my conflict there is, I could definitely see benefit in going less frequent. And also I worry about unintended consequences of doing that. So I wanted to seek feedback.
I think like Matthew said is also what makes most sense to me is to keep the schedule weekly.
Yep.
But if the agenda is finished, or just like shorten it as needed, because you also don't want to be too out of the loop. Like if you miss, like you said, it's every 2 weeks and you miss one, it's been a month, you hear about something, now you forgot completely what you discussed last month. You're not keeping up as well. The information is not, you're not retaining all that information week by week and how it's progressing. Like personally, I prefer weekly.
Yep.
Just kind of always keep it in your mind and, shorten it as needed.
Any, what's the word I'm looking for? Opposing viewpoints on that? Okay, so weekly sounds good. Now, do we want to have a consistent duration, or would we rather set it like change it up and like have they're consistent? They're usually X minutes, but every so often there's one that's longer. You get what I'm saying? Like, what's the preference there?
I think it should be topic based and agenda based and not related to time at all. Like just consistent time when it starts, just to make sure everybody knows ahead of time.
But keep it at an hour. And we have been like that. We have a container, it's an hour block, and then sometimes we have for 15 minutes, sometimes we have for the full hour. But yeah, agree with Chuck. It depends on the topic that we're discussing.
That was sort of my instinct. So now I think the answer is the same. Is there ever a case where we want to have an even longer meeting? And I think probably the answer is maybe, but it's topic based, and we would want to just decide, right? Like, and schedule like
a lot of people have meetings back to back. So in those situations where we might need to extend it, we might even need to create another ad hoc, like you mentioned earlier, like another special meeting, so to speak, to address that bigger topic.
Yep, that makes sense. Excellent. So Shaq already provided one sort of perspective that I added here, but do we have enough of the right people in this call?
By the way, my perspective was kind of the opposite, but this is kind of like similar. Like I meant more like, bring heavy hitters from here, like bring Kevin to the developers call.
Gotcha.
But I also agree with bringing like Nathan and others from, to this call as well.
Yeah, gotcha.
Especially here that we discuss, documentation many times, like having really just Nathan mainly available here so we can stay in sync and he's aware of, like the needs of the operators.
Yeah. Okay. Any other put on this question? All right, I think this one might be kind of related. There was a piece of feedback already in the Node Operators channel about alternating the times. Now, there's a thing on this, which is, on the one hand, there's definitely value in alternating the times. On the other hand, this does create some psychological confusion and like, what's the word I'm looking for? Like, it harms the sort of routine piece of this, right? Where it's like you just know. And it could also cause the issue of fracturing. Like, oh, this person only comes to the ones we hold at this time, right? That sort of thing. On the other hand, we maybe, for example, making this up, but maybe Nathan will never be able to make it to this call at this time, and it would be
I think Aaron will never be able to make it at this time, for example.
Right. So, should we alternate the call maybe, or should we have an additional call that's less frequent at a different time? Something like that.
This seems like the answer to this depends on who we're trying to have on the call, and then people kind of submitting their good, dates or available times. Like, I'm not sure how else to go about this.
This could get awkward, but let's name names here. Who's like your dream team to assemble, like to have together for a discussion, the types of discussion that we tend to have on this call, or for that matter on the developer call?
Well, for me, in priorities, for sure, Kevin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think if we want to focus on documentation, I think we need to have also Nathan involved, so that way all the stuff we discussed could be hopefully materialized. And then, probably the usual suspects who talk, like, Ross, Michael, and Matthew. Like, contributors is a better word.
I'd throw Aaron in there just because, Wharf
For sure.
and Anchor and
yeah.
I mean, that insight into what they're doing or what they fight.
Yeah, I'd even put him more up on the list, like, because Aaron is also like would integrate directly with like the APIs themselves, right? Like you're going to use Wharf as kind of like a middle library to communicate. So, and he always mentions, like, for example, in the Wharf calls, like some things we might be able to change in the API to make life easier, like how can we figure out, what indices there are in a table? Can we add that to the API? It's like all useful input that will involve the node operators and, the core, somebody like Kevin and us, of course.
Are there other community stalwarts that aren't already listed that would be great to get into a call?
Glad I'm a contributor and not a stalwart.
Well, I mean to this call, you get what I'm saying?
I don't know. Sounds
arbitrary.
Very puttish.
Yeah.
I'd say, any infrastructure heavy block producer. There's several of them out there, a lot of them kind of maybe scattered across some chains, but you could rattle off half a dozen on some of the chains, but those that field 1 million requests a week on their APIs or run farms of all sorts of different services, layer 2 specialists. Stans should probably be on there. CC.
Yeah.
He's written a book about everything we talk about, I'm sure. But he's correct. I don't know. He may even be a stalwart. I don't know what's the difference between the two, but Stan's like Aaron. He's on both sides. He's crucial.
All right. So how about agendas? Are we comfortable with the way that it's pretty informal? We tend to, like, maybe we have a main topic, maybe we don't, and we sort of have some open time to gather topics at the beginning, or is there a better way we could be doing that?
I like it. Things come up on the fly.
Yeah. Like tackle all the changes and things that we need to be aware of, and then like freestyle additional stuff.
I mean, it's nice whenever y'all are feeding back to us.
Mhm.
Hey, we're testing this. What do you think about this? What's your, whatever. So
Yep.
the bi-directional of you feeding expectations to us and us feeding them back to y'all.
How about notes? I haven't been providing notes. Daniel generally had provided notes. After a while I stopped looking at the notes because of course I was on the calls. But for one thing, like, are the notes valuable? And if they are they good enough? Could they be better somehow?
I think we're the wrong people to ask because, like, you were on the call, so
You need
never
people
check
who
the
aren't
notes.
on there. Yeah, fair enough.
We should use Obsidian.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because it is good. Actually, one of the things that it can do, of course, is literally just publish a website, or for that matter, it's under the hood. It's just a markdown folder, so it can go right into a GitHub repository or something like that. But anyway, yeah, that's fair. I'll pose that question to see if anybody's actually looking at the notes and what they get out of them, or why they're not looking at them, or that sort of thing. Like maybe there's something they know they're not getting from them that they would look at it if there was something else. But okay. Obviously we're recording this call now. How do we feel about that? There have certainly Go ahead.
You want to put the recorded answer now, and then we'll have the unrecorded answer?
Yeah, that's fine. There have been times in the past, of course, where we've had sensitive topics, and so we've decided not to record in those situations. But has there ever been a time where you've decided not to give certain feedback because recording, or anything like that?
I think it's fine the way it is, because we also get that time at the beginning of the call and potentially towards the end to say anything we might want to address before the recording starts. So I don't see it as an issue, but a benefit to anybody who might need to check it back in the future.
Yep. Okay. We're using Zoom for this. Zoom recently rolled out a feature that uses generative AI for AI notes and transcripts and summarization and yada yada. I've not used it much. I know that it can be controversial because, of course, you're sending that content off to various third parties to process.
Well, we're posting it on YouTube, so
Yeah, that was sort of my perspective as well. So I'm guessing that. And there might be opposition, and I would like to hear it if so. But if we're recording a call, then there's no reason not to also use the AI functionality of Zoom. Is that generally agreeable to folks?
Yeah.
Fine,
Yeah.
just make sure
Yeah.
that it's, polished and not
Well, I mean,
60% accurate.
I think there can
because
also
technical
be
terms are tough,
Yeah, that's definitely true. I know in Whisper, if you use it directly, you can actually provide it with like more or less a dictionary that gives it terms so that it can more accurately transcribe. I don't know if Zoom has anything similar.
Just train it with a default config.ini, and it'll probably get a pretty good head start on things.
Right. Yeah, speaking of which, I still think that we need to build a Heifner AI that like just trained on like everything he's ever said in the context of EOS and Antelope, and yeah, anyway. Okay, so yeah, we'll try that. I think maybe how we'll start at least is like there'll still be human notes, and we'll just specifically call out like the following was AI generated, and if we find that it's directly useful, then we'll drop the human notes, and there will be AI notes that are great. And if it's not, then we could just use it as an input for human nits. But cool. Okay. So Matthew,
I guess one small nuance here is, I guess if the AI notes are while we're recording, because then, like, you know, if the part when we're not recording, the transcripts are still going out, it kind of defies that whole point.
Yep. Only while. Yeah, I don't know. I assume you can, I haven't actually tried it. I assume you can sort of tell it to stop summarizing or stop listening like that, but we'll have to figure
Big
that
Brother
out.
never stops listening.
I mean, it's true, right? Yeah, anyway. So on the attendance question, Matthew asked, I think I'll ask this in other channels because we would only be speculating about what would be effective. I'd like to ask other folks who maybe would like to attend why they're not attending, and get feedback that way. Yep.
From the people we listed, I'm guessing it's mostly time, like conflicts.
Right. Cool. We have some time left, probably not to go super deep, but I'm going to stop sharing. Let's go to Ross's topic on the CPU.
We'll make it work, Matthew. Don't ask questions.
Yeah.
So my understanding, first, Ross, you're talking about what version are you currently running in the context of this question?
5.0 RC2.
Okay.
Yeah, so what are the levers to manipulate it, Kevin? If you can just refresh.
Well, I think it completely changed from RC2 because
It
so
will.
you don't do exactly what you did. They're deprecating the parameter versus
Yeah.
using it.
Yeah, I had
And
it
then
in
the
by
whole
accident. Yeah, I had it in by accident because
That's
it
what I was
had
gonna
the last block offset, whatever. It wouldn't fire up with that, so I had to hash that out. So
So the replacement option in RC3 will be, and I think that's what he's linking to here, will be expressed in milliseconds.
Okay, that's it. Okay.
Twofold.
So right now, the way I'm
Number one,
manipulating it right now is the way that you manipulate it for RC2, but that will change. And just to get it right in my head, Kevin, if I had to take it up to, just for the purpose of RC2 discussion, I know it's going to millisecond. If I took it up to like 90%, right? That's also good. That's okay, right? Because by the time it gets to the end, it waits. Have you seen this, Mark? It actually it stops, and then two seconds.
I've seen it. I've seen the results. I mean, what the first thing we noticed, because the default right now is 90%. So that's what it did. Well, 90% of 12 seconds is actually like 600 milliseconds. So it cut it a little bit before the 12th block was what we would know of as scheduled.
I had mine at 40. And you really notice it.
Well, when I launched
I was like,
correct. I mean, I didn't notice it when I was doing it, but that's what led me down the thing. That same thing is the other two balked and said, no, you can't do this anymore. Okay, cool. I knew that was changing, but I didn't change the other one. And then it was like, whoa, wait a minute. Well, then Matthew actually picked up whenever I did back it off the default that the 90% was 600 milliseconds, and it started showing the 12th block early. Because of the way we always used to measure them. It wasn't allowed to come earlier than the 500 milliseconds. So when it showed up with 600 milliseconds like negative, it started looking odd. Now it's working exactly as expected, but that was the comment about, hey, maybe it needs to be like 450 versus 600 as a default.
So what is the healthy on RC3?
I think the default. The default we came up with, that's kind of what it's going to do by default now. So if you don't specify it at all, it should try to kick your last block out with 450 negative millisecond latency, which should.
Okay. Wait, just to get it right in my head. So what is the command still to be named? I know whatever it's called, right? But if you set it to 450 millisecond, what is it actually doing?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, so the new command as it is right now is produce block offset ms. So for milliseconds. So the idea there was renaming it so that we wouldn't get into the situation that you're in that it's like, okay, I had this parameter at 40, and then it kind of magically in 5.0 means something completely different. Right. So now what'll happen is the Node.js will fail to start if you have that set. And you have to figure out, okay, why? And it's like, oh, okay, there's this new setting for this. And so, yeah, in RC2, the default was 90%, which was 600 milliseconds early, like what Michael was saying. So the also feedback thought that was a bit too conservative. So the new default in RC3 will be 450 milliseconds for this setting, which is equivalent to the setting that you're tweaking of 92.5. However, you can't actually set 92.5 with your setting, which is another kind of drawback of doing the percentage approach, was because you can only do whole percentages. So you could set it to 92 or you could set it to 93, but you couldn't set it to 92.5, which is actually the new default. So the new way of setting it with milliseconds is actually better because you can get finer tuning. And it's also directly what you want to specify, I would postulate as well, because what you're interested in is how much latency is between you and the next block producer, right?
Yeah.
And you're like, okay, I'm seeing on average, whatever. Let's say on average, I'm seeing 100 milliseconds. And it's like, well, okay, on average, I'm seeing 100 milliseconds, but I want to be conservative, so I'll go with 200 milliseconds, right? Or maybe you go, well, what's the worst I've seen in the last 6 months? Well, the worst I've seen is 300 milliseconds. Okay, well, I'll go with 350 milliseconds, right? And so that allows you to change that setting. So we went still with a pretty conservative value, 450 milliseconds. That gives you, 400 milliseconds for your blocks to reach the next block producer, specifically the last block to reach the next block producer. But it actually compresses all of them. And so, if 450 milliseconds is not enough, well, then, go 600, go like you're seeing, you could go a whole like 2 seconds, 2000 milliseconds.
Yeah. And that's what it is. Yeah. At the moment, I was like, whoa.
Which again is fine in that, like, that's fine in the consensus mechanism, because in terms of consensus, having a block early is not a problem until you reach 7 seconds, which is more than what you're actually allowed to configure this as. So from a consensus perspective, you're fine to set that to any value you want, including like 1 or something, which would probably not be what you'd want, because you just produce a ton of empty blocks immediately and be done with your round, which I would hope the community would not be very happy about. But yeah, so you can set that parameter, giving it plenty of time to get to the next one. And what it does is it simply takes that number, divides it by 12, and subtracts that from each of the time that the block has. So if it's 450 divided by 12,
and then it puts them all together.
Right?
Yeah.
And that was the realization in that. And there's actually there's a conversation on this PR between Greg and I. If you actually expand the show resolved, it might be interesting to read through some of those. Like Greg was saying, well, hey, how's this work? And we're having a nice conversation. So there's some good stuff if you want to read all the commentary on that PR.
But I think I had to actually see it. I had to see it in the wild on the console log. And I'm like, that's what he was talking about.
This fixes the problem that we ran into. And Kevin, I think I remember when he kind of asked the first question, was because we always set the last block percentage to like 3 or something, or because y'all got away from the last block being MS. Right. But now we're going back to it all being, you can collapse them all into a smaller time frame, or really just have a better fine tuning over the end of the round versus just the last block.
So you would need like 490 milliseconds.
It's about like 450. I mean, whatever it is. I mean, he said 92.5 or whatever, but it's 97. I mean,
sorry, Kevin.
Yeah, so right. So the new parameter takes that value, divides it by 12, subtracts it from these blocks and compresses them together. And the realization there was like, what's the drawback to that? And well, one drawback is that you've got this window of time at the end where you could conceptually have higher latency, but you only have higher latency in the situations where, well, first of all, you weren't already configuring it to that effective amount, in which case you're getting less throughput
On all the other blocks.
Yeah, on
Yeah,
all
yeah.
the other blocks. So
Yeah.
you're redeeming that time, right? So instead of like pausing between blocks, you're redeeming that time and saying, well, I'll just go ahead and start the next block and I'll start working on it. And for those situations where you've got plenty of transactions queued up and you start your round, you guys know this, fairly often you can fill your first block with just what you have queued up ready to go, right? Well, what this allows you to do is actually do that, send it off and start the next block right away. And if you still have more transactions already queued up ready to go, well, you can fill that block up and send it off. And so the maximum of that, which I have seen occasionally, is you can actually do 12 blocks full of transactions ready to go. You fill up 12 blocks, you send them all out, and that all could happen within 200 milliseconds times 12, so 2.4 seconds, right? And you're like, well, that's bad because now I've got what is that?
3.5 seconds.
3.5
of
seconds
wait time.
of wait time,
Yeah.
which means that if somebody sends a transaction there, their latency is expanded by 3.5 seconds. But even in the current scheme, it's no better because you're going to do all the ones you have queued up to begin with either way. And so it's not like they would be able to get within that 3.5 seconds in the old scheme either, because you're still going to spend all that time filling those blocks. So this just compresses it with the idea that like the ones that are queued up do get better latencies. The one that would have come in late, well, they don't get any worse latency. They don't have to go to the next BP anyway. So it doesn't matter that there's this 3 seconds amount of time. The only difference it makes is if you're not having full blocks, there is the whatever difference between this new parameter that you're specifying versus what you used to be specifying. That difference there is a potential increase in latency for transactions that happen to hit the 12th block, but only the ones that would happen to hit that last block. And so that's that a pretty small negative for a rather large positive for everything else.
I'm more curious, like on those heavy traffic networks where we see those subject or unapplied queues build up just from us cutting our last block short and it just getting smashed or, blacklisted that rolled over, whatever that causes that waterfall to the next. We're doing that with 1/2 second block right now with a little bit more. I mean, obviously if it didn't get through it, but what if somebody starts shoving it out in 2.5, 3 seconds? You've got 3 seconds of early full blocks. And now everything for 6 more blocks is going into that queue. So instead of tens of thousands of transactions in that mempool, it's going to crank up to hundreds of thousands. I mean, I've seen it go to hundreds of thousands. So I'm curious.
Well, it should help that situation. So what this is really the biggest benefit of this is when the chain is overloaded. If it's not overloaded, there's really not a lot of difference. But when it's overloaded, you get the difference. And the other thing it helps with is those failed transactions, right? So the old scheme was you have 500 milliseconds where you would shave that off and say maybe 400 milliseconds of that I'm actually doing work. Well, during that 100 milliseconds, you weren't doing work at all. You're effectively sleeping. So what happens now is it compresses that up. Well, let's say you've got some failed transactions in that first amount. Well, that just gives you more time to actually attempt those failed transactions because those aren't going to be subtracted from the amount of throughput you have, which now they are. They eat up that 400 milliseconds regardless. Well, now they'll eat up the complete time that you have, which is now greater. So you have more time to evaluate failed transactions that won't impact the throughput of the chain.
I'm ecstatic about it. I know we're over time, but 2 birds, 1 stone. Number one, you made the node default to something that tends to work the best. It's not, you have to know to do it to even not cause micro forks out of the box. And then secondly, it's a much more efficient use of the CPU timing and a knob to turn. If it's really that bad going to Australia, fine, back it up to 600 milliseconds and say, takes an extra stamp to get out there. So anyway, I'm excited about it. And as always, thanks for the detailed explanation.
Thanks, Kev.
All right. Well, that covers all the topics that we had for today. Thanks everybody for joining and for contributing and for giving feedback on the calls. I'll be sending out a recurring invite going forward. So that, you know, I wanted to have this discussion before sending a recurring invite, but so yeah, look for that. And that's it. Thanks again. Bye, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.